Good morning, folks, and welcome back to the Ask Kenny question and answer sessions. Morning, Kenny. Good to be back with you. The ball's in your court soon. Today we're going to bring a fairly complex issue, and it's going to probably take about 3 or 4 times to deal with it over the next 3 or 4 weeks. But we would really appreciate, Kenny and I would both appreciate some feedback from folks, if that's possible, just to make it a two-way situation, which would be great. The issue today before us, Kenny, which you have received, is a many-sided question to do with mental health and the issues of Scripture and the church and perhaps other issues that will come up as we go along. But they're also all tied in with the church generally and mental health, physical health, spiritual health, emotional health, and so on and so forth. All these things tied up. So we'll come to the question. Does Scripture address or speak into mental health issues generally?
If you were just to, I don't know, whatever people's preferred option of searching is, whether it's a Google search and just go for mental health, Bible, you might end up finding that it has nothing whatsoever to say on the subject because it doesn't directly speak to that phrase, as it were. But the more that you actually look at Scripture and think it through and think about what mental health is as well, you see that it has an awful lot to say on the subject. Partly different areas in some respects. There's in Scripture, if we were to say, well, why is there mental health issues? Why are there mental health issues? Scripture would actually provide the answer to that. So in the beginning, when God creates everything, it's all very good, everything is perfect. Mm-hmm. Then the fall happens, and the effects of sin, one of them is the way that we think. So,
but it'll also affect us physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
Even if you think physically, at the start of Scripture, people live in a really, really long period of time, mm-hmm. and that seems to be reducing as the effects of sin are felt upon them. Mm-hmm. The hope is in the new creation, which we'll get to in a minute. There's a reversal of all these effects of sin, and one of them is the physical. It's going to be great that our bodies will no longer be wearing down. Folk who've never walked will walk, all because of the grace of mm-hmm. God. And you get to see a glimpse of that in the ministry of Jesus, where he's reversing the effects of sin, so the blind see, the deaf hear, these sorts of things. And I guess one of the areas that we haven't focused on much, in some respects, is the way that sin affects the mind. And
People are a little afraid of that, aren't they? I mean, sometimes we find that, don't we?
Very much so, and I guess we don't know too much about it, and therefore that creates a fear within us to stay from it. But Scripture, theologians have spoken about, they refer to it as the noetic effects of sin, so that the way that sin has affected the way we think, the way we process.
What's noetic mean?
Just mind. It's a Greek word for mind,
okay.
So it's
right.
how sin has affected the mind, the
right.
intellect, the processing abilities that we have. And people often misunderstand. So there's been people within the church who would hold to the total depravity. And that doesn't mean that we're really awful and depraved. It just means that sin has affected every part of what it means to be human, including the mind. And with that in place, I mean, Scripture speaks honestly about the fall, about the effects of sin. So it explains to us why we have mental health issues, the way the mind has been affected. And Scripture's honest. It displays people in Scripture wrestling with these things. So,
have you got an example for that?
Yeah, the psalmist here, and this is the sons of Korah writing, and in Psalm 42, he's almost like having this conversation with himself, but a lot of people will resonate with it when he says, why are you cast down, O my soul? Mm-hmm. Why are you in turmoil within me? Mm-hmm. And many people can go through life and that doesn't resonate too much with them. Others, they think that's where I am. It's like my mind is in absolute turmoil. Mm-hmm. And the more you stop and think about it, Scripture splits us up, as it were, into two parts. There's our physical frame, and then there's our soul or our heart within us. And that's where we think, where we process, where we feel guilt, all these sorts of things. And Scripture has so much to speak to that part of our being, even to the sense that when you get into the New Testament, it speaks about us being renewed through the transforming of our mind.
Right.
And Scripture speaking into our thinking, our conscience, our guilt, all these sorts of things, our fears, our anxieties. So Scripture has a lot to speak into that issue, but it also sets before us hope, which is
absolutely
one day all the effects of sin will be reversed.
But in the midst of what is happening now and people's situations with mental health in particular, there's a lot of darkness, a lot of fear, a lot of doubt, a lot of questions. Even people who are responding to people with mental health have issues with that. Now, for people who are suffering from mental health, and I know there are various degrees of that and different forms of it, I just thought perhaps a word which came to me while I was thinking about it was, even the darkness is not dark to you, O Lord. You know, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow, you are with me. He's there, he cares, he knows, he is, he knows about us, even though he perhaps does not heal us yet.
Yeah. And that's where I think equally with Christ, he has shared in what it means to be man. And one of the interesting things is he's known as a man of sorrows. And we can only imagine the heartbreak within as he's gazing upon a creation which was good, now ruined. His experience in the garden where he's sorrowful even unto death. And even on the cross, the sense of dereliction, abandonment that he experiences, and all of that going on within him, and he can relate to us in our darkest
He's
moments.
not unable to sympathize with us.
That's right.
Yeah. Good. Well, Kenny, thank you. I think that's probably at least started us off, and no doubt we'll carry on in the next few portions of it. Thank you.
Okay.